how did you hear about this whole thing? What transpired to even get you in the running for this?
I have heard a long time ago that there was a possibility that John Miller was going to retire at the end of this school year, but nothing official. And then as it got closer and closer to, the end of May, I heard that John had retired, and so I was very excited to consider the opportunity. This has been an organization I've worked with and been around for a long time.
You've been so involved with the high school as well as the school district as well as District 6 here.
Yes.
In that process, do you do that decision making even to apply? Do you talk to people? Do you just kind of internalize it? What did you do to decide, okay, I want to do this?
I didn't have to think very long, mostly because this has been an organization that I have wanted to work with and for a long time. I've had many working relationships with different people that are actively involved in the organization, and all of that has just constantly led me to wanting to be a part of something bigger. And so I didn't have to think long, but I did go out for coffee with Mick Hoffman and have an opportunity to get to know the new executive director. I found that to be really important, not knowing him very well, and wanting to know who I'd be working for and some of his ideas and visions for the association. And that was the one thing I did before I applied.
Yeah, because you're going to work with someone, you need to know if your goals are anywhere close to what he's got to do.
Correct. And with him being new to the association and not somebody I have worked a lot with, I thought that was important for me professionally.
I'm trying to remember, he comes from a different state?
He's coming from the Vancouver School District.
Okay.
He sat on the WIA Executive Board. He's been an athletic director, but most recently he's been an assistant superintendent down in Vancouver.
Coming out of school for you, and then getting a chance to come back and coach at your alma mater. Did you have aspirations of administration, or did you just want to be a teacher coach, or what was your original kind of goal that you had in mind?
It sounds silly, but it really does go back to when I was at Orchard Middle School. I had a teacher and a coach, and I thought, wow, I want to do that. I really want to do that. And so I really began that journey of saying I wanted to be a teacher and a coach. And then I came up to Wenatchee High School as a student, and I was a TA for Bob Eller, the athletic director at the time. And I was very fortunate that Bob asked me to be a student representative on a committee that he was running here at Wenatchee High School. And I dove all in, and after TAing for him 2 years and being actively involved helping him with B basketball, I walked away with, I think I'd like to be an athletic director. So when I left Wenatchee High School as a 17, 18-year-old kid and went on to Gonzaga, I knew deep down in that I wanted to be a teacher and a coach, and I knew I wanted to be an athletic director. So it's been in the making for a long time.
You had quite a run here before you turned the reins over. In the process of stepping out of the athletic director role here, again, was that just something you saw as a natural progression for you? Is my education, I've taken it to this next level with getting the master's and doing all of the things you have to do behind the scenes. Was that just part of it then?
Yeah, I after 12 years being an athletic director for our school district, I felt one of the things that I missed was the time with kids, especially the times with kids that are struggling. And I just felt this pull to spend time with those kids, and this opportunity. Wenatchee High School hadn't had a dean of students. It wasn't a position that was a normal part of our culture, and it was new. And the position was really around removing barriers for kids and working with kids that are struggling. And that was something, as an athletic director, working with those kids that were less fortunate, was really something I loved. So I looked at this as an opportunity I couldn't really pass up. It was a step for me as well. I had just gotten my principal certification, wanted to kind of move down that road, wanted to take my leadership into some other avenues. And honestly, I'm very, very fortunate and happy that I did that, because the last 5 years of spending time with students in, obviously when I went to school versus when I was an athletic director versus the last 5 years, kids have changed, society has changed, the stressors in their life has changed, barriers between them and success you know, just between poverty and homelessness and screen time. There's so many things that are really, really relevant to their lives that I hadn't been exposed to for a while that has really opened my eyes. And I think taking that to the work I'm going to do at the WIAA, because ultimately it's about the experience for kids. So I'm really excited and thankful that I did take this little journey into just the regular school system for a little while.
You may not have known the path before you took the step, but
correct,
has its reason.
Correct, and that's exactly how I felt about it. It just seemed like the right thing to do at the time, and this experience as a Dean of Students has been absolutely amazing. And in fact, it'll be hard to leave the kids. I didn't realize how hard it would be to leave the kids because I had been away from them for quite a while. So, and just really, I work with kind of a student services team here, and it's really, yes, it has student discipline attached to it, but it's really about supporting students and understanding the things that they're going through and trying to help them develop that grit and determination that they need. And when I worked as an athletic director, you know, athletes, because they've been exposed to a lot of failure, they've learned a little bit more of the grit and determination, and I think it's easier to tap into it. And it's much harder to tap into it in the other role where they don't have something that they are working towards. They're not necessarily on a team and they haven't had those. So trying to help them develop those really important skills that kids need to be successful has been just really awesome.
You may have just answered it, but I was going to ask you the biggest thing you've learned being the Dean of Students.
That's huge. That you can't talk a kid into understanding the importance of a high school diploma. You'd think that you could talk them into it. You'd think you could tell them a story. You'd think you could somehow expose them to something, but you can't talk them into it. You have to show them somehow. It takes more than talking them into it. And it's pretty amazing how many kids do have a hard time realizing the importance of that single step in their life.
What was the interview process for this new position for you?
It was a trip over to Renton. Had an opportunity to interview with their staff. There was, 6, 7 people at the table. It was, I tend to be very comfortable speaking to people. You can throw me into most any environment, I'll do great. And that's probably the first time in a lot of years I was nervous. I didn't realize I was nervous until I walked in and I looked around and I thought, I know these people really well, number one. And number two, I didn't realize maybe how bad I wanted this opportunity and how important it was to me, and knowing really how important it is to more than just me to have this opportunity. And then I got pretty nervous, but I got through it and it was fine.
With knowing the people around the table like that, did you maybe feel pressure because they maybe had high expectations for you in that process because they know you?
Yeah, I think
they were happy to have you in that
yes,
table?
I think it was a little bit everything. And I also know that they know me, and I also know that if I have the opportunity to do the work, the things that I say are going to have to be the actions that I pursue. So I didn't realize that I was a little more nervous than I expected.
How long between that sit down and when you got the call saying congratulations?
That's kind of an interesting story as well. Upon the completion of the interview, Mick said he'd let me know within a week. And so my heart sank because I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can wait a week to find out. So it was shortly thereafter. It was within a 24-hour window. He was able to call me and give me an opportunity to accept a position with him.
So how soon do you start, and your world's got to be kind of turning upside down, and congratulations, BJ, you just threw your whole life upside down.
Yes, and honestly, I'm so excited to do the work. I'd be there today, obviously, but I need to tie up some things here, a lot of moving parts. The WIA Coaches School is the first big thing on the agenda, and that's July 25, 26, 27, something like that. So I'll be in the office for sure by July 22nd to start working with staff, doing what we need to do that week. If I have the opportunity or there's need for me to be there earlier, I can. So one of the nice things about education is you do have sort of that summer off. So while I don't have a lot of work responsibilities, I am going to try to move and try to do all those moving parts. But I'll be flexible and get there whenever they need me to be. So
your past coaching at Rogers, is that helping you at all in this? I mean, you're kind of back in the neighborhood, so to speak.
I think it helps just a little bit from the standpoint of the people, the relationships that I made during that time in the South Puget Sound League with coaches and athletic directors and what have you. Several of those people have reached out and just shared some excitement about me coming back over. So maybe those 4 years there combined with being in Eastern Washington for a long time, it makes kind of a nice blend where I do understand a bit of what happens in that area versus I know a lot more here. But
it's kind of interesting that you can not travel very far in this valley and not bump into a Kuntz somewhere or another. Here your brother just takes a job, moves back to the valley, and now you're taking a job moving out of the valley.
Yeah, that's the benefit of having as many of us. We're a lot of moving parts, and I think I basically, there's nobody that lives sort of near SeaTac, and I think everybody needed a landing point. So I was sent over to be the place for people to park their car when they head out on an airplane, I guess. So we all need a spot. That happens to be mine this time.
This might be a difficult question for you because I know, knowing you don't think this way, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. What is your legacy at Wenatchee High School?
Well, I guess I'd like to think that my legacy might be in the connections I've made wide and far. So when I think about kind of the time in athletics, one of the things that was probably the most meaningful for me is that dive deep into alumni relations and those connections I've made with people that came way before me in my time. And then now as a dean of students, those relationships with students, the relationships with staff, just the extension of that, I think I would like to think that my legacy really is just building that relationship for people that have a really positive feel about Wenatchee High School. Obviously, my roots are at Wenatchee High School. 26 years of my life have spent in these hallways, and I won't tell you my age, but that is more than half of my life. I've been in these exact hallways. Unfortunately, it's never been, really remodeled, so the hallways look the same. But point being that there are a couple of teachers that are still here from when I went to school here. There are just relationships that run deep and run wide from, people who played in that 1953 state championship, whatever year that was. 48, was it 48? 1948 state championship football game. I would say that some of the relationships I made with those guys would be very, very close to me and very important to me, as well as a 17-year-old kid that I stood on the stage and got a picture with him at graduation. So I just think that vastness of those relationships I've built and people feeling strength and belief that that I care about them and I care about their journey, whether it was a 1948 graduate or a 2019 graduate.
That being said, being in the Renton office, you're not going to have that day-to-day relationship with the kids anymore.
Yes.
That going to be probably the toughest thing for you?
Yeah, I shared with them in the interview process that there were two things concerning for me. One of them was there wasn't enough noise and activity in the office, and I was only in there for 20 minutes and there was not enough activity. And they said that would change. It just happened to be summer. And then secondly, I asked where the kids were, that we needed to have the kid connection. And one of the things that I was very hopeful for is Mick, the new director, has a vision of getting kids a little more involved in the association. So I'm very excited about that. I'm hoping that becomes reality and I can spend some time with kids. I also have wanted for quite a while to get back into pulling together some conferences and things. So I'm hoping to be able to expand some of my passions around working with kids and to do some additional things.
In your opinion, how important is sports in school or a district? How important is sports?
If you would have asked me before I was the dean of students, I would have said absolutely every kid needs to be involved in sports. Since being a dean of students, I would now tell you that every kid needs to be involved in something. It doesn't matter if it's DECA, if it's band, if it's cutting trees down, if it's choir, it doesn't matter what it is. Kids need to have a connection beyond the classroom to be successful. The place where I feel so strongly about sports is really that the grit and determination that's developed from that. I also feel like the ability, especially for young girls and young women, to have those role models to be successful. And that's something that, even though Title IX is happened a long time ago, you're just now continuing to see the ramifications of that and the celebration of that and the victories. So I also feel like sports is that avenue for a lot of young women to further their opportunities in ways that not everybody gets a chance to do.
Talk about the challenge. You brought up Title IX. I was going to talk about it later. The challenge that we have in the future as far as gender identification and those things. Do we, with that, are we going to see a day where Title IX just is not relevant, is not prevalent anymore? Or where do you see our future in extracurricular activities?
I would like to think, just speaking of Title IX specifically, that there would be a time that we wouldn't even have to talk about that anymore, that it is happening across the board, equality and equal opportunities. Unfortunately, it doesn't take much to see that it's not happening yet. Just thinking a little bit, I've been following women's soccer with the World Cup and some of those things, and it just kind of makes you go, sometimes. And I really hope that there's a time. I think back to, reading stories and things about my mom when she played basketball when it was half and half, and she was some sort of state badminton champion in the state of Washington. I don't know much about it back then, but just thinking where we've come from there to where we are now is pretty amazing. And I think as we continue to mold and we continue to get right people on the forefront, I think it'll become less and less of an ideal. I hope so. I hope in my lifetime you can see a significant amount of equality across the board.
You are a person of which you just spoke.
Yes.
A strong woman that is a leader. Do you shoulder that responsibility and think, okay, I know I've got young ladies that are looking at me?
Absolutely. And I think it's because there were women when I went through school, just Wenatchee High School grads, I thought, oh my gosh, like I want to be that person. I want to do that. But very few of those people kind of took it to that next level administratively and leadership wise. And so now I'm sort of breaking that barrier. And then you have to say, like, who's the next one that's going to go beyond me and not just work at the WIAA, but actually, be the director of who's going to take that to the next level. I'm super excited for that next level, but I feel some responsibility towards continuing to go out and to be a leader. And that's one thing I haven't gotten to do as much as the Dean of Students, is really to sort of lead women, and that's something that I'm hoping I'll get a chance to do a little bit at the WIA office.
You talked about student involvement with the WIAA. Is that going to take the form of a cross-state committee type of thing of kids or something like that, as far as being a sounding board for decision making?
I don't know for sure how it's going to work, but I do know that there's a desire to have students, whether it's being members of the executive board as an opportunity to speak or to do some cross-state things. It'll be really interesting to see how that evolves and what we can make of that. But kids have an amazing voice. That is something that I've learned, the last 5 years, is if you ask them the right question, you can get some pretty amazing information out of kids. They're pretty insightful.
I think you have to show them that you're there for more than just a yes or no.
Yes, for sure.
How difficult is it, from your perspective now, with the years that you've been around high school sports and now taking this next step? And I think this kind of leads into some of the issues that we have with sports these days in high school, is reasonable expectations of the athlete by both the athlete and their families. How do you address that?
It's not easy. I think some of the most important things you can do from the very beginning of a student's experience in sport is to make sure the message is out there to parents, the message is out there to kids about reasonable expectations, about understanding what the role is and understanding the journey. It's really a long journey, and unfortunately I experienced this as an athletic director. Kids that by the time they get into what should be a highlight of their high school career, they decide to stop participating, whether it's about specialization or just it's just no fun anymore. So I think the hope is that trend maybe slows a little bit, and that now that we're retraining people along the way, that we're getting coaches better trained and getting the word out with parents. And I think that's about all you can do. It's continue to send the message and continue to provide opportunities for both coaches of youth and parents of youth to understand the journey and the relationship.
Being in the position with the next step up as far as, having a statewide impact, do you hope to, have that be kind of a focus, or at least a stump for the WIAA, is to help districts and coaches across the state in realizing that, the meal ticket is not in sports?
Yeah. It's definitely something that I have passion behind and I am interested in. If the opportunity provides it, I will jump right in on that, because it is something that, I really tried as a Wenatchee High School athletic director to send those messages to family, to send, to really about equality and not about one sport more important to the other than, and also about just specialization. And I tried to really wave that flag. I feel very strongly about it. When I was a kid, my dad wouldn't allow me to do any sort of AAUs or club sports. We weren't allowed to do it. We could only do sort of one thing at a time and really focus on that. And that's something that I learned as a kid that I tried to kind of preach as an athletic director, and I hope I get the opportunity to continue to send that message.
You mentioned earlier about the importance, through your experience with being the dean of students, to just have them doing something.
Mm-hmm.
On the juxtaposition of that, are we having the kids do too much in some cases? I mean, there's no break anymore, it seems, and we're racing them to this practice, we're racing them to that practice.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that, for sure. It really, it's kid specific, family specific about how much they throw at kids. But I'm also surprised how many kids, when you talk to them about, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Or, hey, are you involved in an activity? I'm pretty amazed at how many kids aren't. So I do think that there are those groups of kids that do too much. And then there's a group of kids that's right on, and then there's a whole group of kids that do nothing. So my hope is that kids can find something to get involved in that helps them build a relationship. And I think probably the biggest thing that I see that's important to that as well is make a commitment to something and stay through it to the end. And that just seems to be, not everybody has that skill anymore to stay with something to the end. So those are the things I think are really important.
Officials. If we don't have officials, we don't have games.
Absolutely.
We have a severe shortage across the board here across the state of Washington. How can you help address that on the state level to reverse that trend?
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you brought that up. One of the things that District 6 has done, and I think some other districts around the state have done as well, but have started official appreciation weeks. And I don't know if you've seen that, where the league buys, $5 Starbucks cards, and every official that they have that week, they give them a little something to say thank you. I think taking the time to do that would be number one. I also think the work that we could do somehow to soften the blow for an official when it's their first year doing the work. And what that looks like exactly, I don't know, but I think we lose a lot of officials in the first couple of years. And so really trying to take a proactive approach with our leagues with, hey, notification, this is somebody's, first year, and making sure an AD is in close proximity to sort of buffer the attacks if need be, and just trying to make sure that those officials have good mentors and have good experiences, so as they build skills, maybe they'll stay with it. I can't suggest that there's an easy answer to that, but I do know on District 6 board, we have Steve Simonson, who is an outstanding official in the Wenatchee Valley. We just recognized Bill Edwardson for his years of service as a basketball assigner. I think having that in our minds as leaders in the state of Washington athletics, be thinking about that, and being creative and proactive, continuing to come up with ideas and thoughts. I don't think there's necessarily an easy idea. It'd be great if community colleges would start officiating classes and start growing them. So it's just, I don't have a great answer, but I think doing little bits of things that we can is going to be helpful.
I was walking on a loop trail yesterday, and I walked down past Columbia Coal Store, and I'm looking up at the Ridge to River signs on the waterfront there. And I was thinking, man, that's too bad we don't have that anymore. And I thought about the people that were involved, and Jennifer Corfiatis' name popped to mind, and all the passionate people.
Yes.
And you talk about programs, and you talk about coaching, and you talk about just, you have to have passionate people. How do you find passionate people and put them in the right spot to help with a successful program?
My experience would suggest that when people do walk through the door and express an interest, I think taking the time as leaders to hone that interest and to ask questions and to put people in positions that they're interested in. One of the things that I think, reflecting back as an athletic director, at the number of people that would either walk through your door or approach you at an event and have some passion around something. And one of the things that I reflect back on is taking the time to dip into that a little bit and have those conversations. And now as an educational leader, when you're working with a lot of staff members, and really, I think anytime you stop and get to know somebody and ask questions and learn what it is that they're interested in, and then trying to get them pointed in a direction that they can use that. I know that I had people in my life that did that for me, that kind of got to know my interests and saw strengths and pushed me in the right direction. And it's something that I don't feel like I'm seeing happening as regularly anymore. And I think we're busy and people are going in a million directions and distracted. And I do think that maybe there's been a little bit of pause in stopping and diving into people's strengths and interests. So that would be one of my thoughts, is it just takes some time to actually go back to relationship building and understanding where somebody is. Because people, I mean, you see it in athletics all the time. It's that one person who's been a ticket taker for 30 years. And it's not that they're necessarily passionate about ticket taking, but they have found something that interests them, and relationships are important. And I think anywhere in athletics, you're going to find, whether it's officials, ticket takers, even the people that are sweeping the gym floor or sending out statistics once a week to people. There's a lot of very passionate people. You just have to not take advantage, or not, you just got to hone those relationships a little bit and give them a place to present their voice.
The challenge with that is, now you might have people in positions utilizing their passion that are now out of a job because of budget cuts. And we see that across the state, especially right here in Wenatchee School District.
Yes.
Where things out of their control, they're faced with having to make very difficult decisions, cutting programs, cutting personnel.
Yes.
How do we address that from your now perspective with the WIAA? I know it's not, in your purview necessarily, but obviously it impacts you as it does the rest of the state.
Absolutely. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. We're in an interesting time in education right now, with the way funding is working and the way districts are being impacted by just different teachers unions and a lot of statewide activity. I'm not sure I have a great answer, besides the fact that we need to continue to do the work and continue to figure out creative ways, whether it's creative ways to help districts get funded differently, or creative ways to staff, or making partnerships within communities to be able to take on work that needs to be done. I don't have a lot of great answers, and it has been really unfortunate piece of education, and being a leader in education is seeing those ramifications, and really just the personal effect it has, not only on the people who are having adjustments to their jobs, but on the people that care about them, and then on the teachers and the students who, it's been a really unfortunate time, and I'm hopeful that there's some hope ahead for that.
Private partnerships, public-private partnerships are, I think, key. You see that across the state now with coaches that are coming out of the private sector that aren't in the schools anymore because you have to. On the administrative side of that, though, coming from the state level, you also have to watch your P's and Q's there, don't you? Because you could have someone that's passionate that works for XYZ company that suddenly they've got a brand new football team, and they're bringing kids in from other places and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a balance there, right?
Yeah, I think between education for coaches, and one of the things that I value about the WIA is they do a good job of requiring coaches to have a certain number of hours in education. And so hopefully through that education process, you can help coaches see all the different rules and regulations and expectations and how to kind of shift their thinking to understanding this as a school system. And that's a very challenging thing to do, especially when there's certain pockets that, you know, have access to money and have access to funding and just have access to things that some people in our rural communities, really in Eastern Washington, don't have access to. And trying to level that playing field is a challenge.
So I asked you how important it is to have sports. How important is it, or is it all, to have a successful sports program? And I guess define successful however you wish.
I was always a big believer, and I'm not positive this has any real merit behind it, but I really think hanging out in the top 3 is a really good place to be. And I don't think you have to, it's nice every once in a while if you win it, but you don't need to be there. I think you want to be up there in the top half, because that is showing that we're winning more than we're losing. It's showing positive progression. But there's a time and a place, you know, to not do so well and get to build that program up. So I don't know if I've ever hung my keys on you got to win it all. But I do think trying to always be sitting up in the top is a good place to be, because you need to be able to build within a school system some tradition and some enthusiasm behind your programs. So I think when you are one of those, whether it's a smaller school that is competing against bigger schools all the time and having a hard time winning, or whether it's just a school that's just struggling finding the culture to win, I think it's really, really important to be able to put them in positions where they can get themselves up in that top half of their league just to build that for their entire school. It's pretty amazing what a winning team can do for a school.
With that, you know, the extracurricular activities, I'm not even going to say sports, music programs, the theater, whatever the case may be. The people that are paying the bills, the taxpayers in the district, that's the only chance they get to see anything in regards to the school. So taking that to the sports field, packed stands and a positive program, not even a winning program, but a positive program, seems to me to be pretty important for the district as a whole. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree with you, very much so. And I think really the perception when a community member comes to an athletic event, comes to a choir concert, comes to a band concert, decides to go down and watch the parade and see our kids in the parade, I think the way that your students, you know, show themselves to be says a lot about our community, and it helps people whether they believe or don't believe in what we're doing with kids. So creating that positive culture and respecting culture is so important, so important. And you know, I think about our Wenatchee High School mariachi program, and I remember several years ago going to a mariachi concert, and you know, there'd be, you know, 100, 200 people in the auditorium. And now we can hardly host mariachi because they have to go to the Toyota Center because our auditorium isn't big enough. And quite often in the Wenatchee Valley, people come to our school because our auditorium's the biggest. But yet our own mariachi program has to go to the Toyota Center. So that just says a lot for what some positive program and perception does, and the number of kids that get scholarships and those kind of things. It's pretty impressive. And I think I think about Wenatchee High School and the number of programs we have that are excelling and giving kids those opportunities, whether it's local opportunities, statewide opportunities, national opportunities. It's pretty amazing, and we're really fortunate to have a superintendent like we have in Brian for as many years to allow groups to have those kind of opportunities, to be able to travel and to see places and to represent us. It's pretty amazing.
So I'm going to hit you with a hard one here.
Okay.
All of that you're leaving.
Yes, with all of that. And honestly, the WIAA has been something that I have been so entwined with for so long. And it's a vision of work that I want to do that's really on a statewide level. And I'm excited about the direction they're going. I have had tremendous amount. I just think of the people in my life, from Bob Eller being an athletic director, and he was involved in the WIAA. I remember wondering, like, what is that? And then the next thing you knew, Bruce Campbell was actively involved in the WIAA, and then Bruce became the District 6 director, and then I became the AD, and then I became the District 6 director, and we've all sort of been following each other around. But I think about those people, and even Mike Colbreeze, who's there, and all the visits he's done to Wenatchee, to whether it's meet with District 6 board or see him at a state event, and I've always had a lot of respect for the work that the WIA does, and I see this as sort of a culmination of all of my my interests and my passions and my relationships all coming into this job at this space at this time. So very excited to have the opportunity to be thinking and making movement on a statewide level.
I hear from a lot of coaches, parents, even athletes that grumble about the WIAA.
Sure.
You have that perspective, which a lot of people can't have, because you know what's happening behind the scenes. You know the amount of work that goes into everything that goes on with every athletic event that they govern.
Yes.
Is there a repair job to the perception of the WIAA that needs to be done, that could be done? That I think that there's a perception that's just a heavy-handed organization that rules over sports, and they just put the hammer down. I don't know. I'm not saying that's accurate, but I think that that's around.
Yeah, and right now the WIA is in the middle of a large conversation around governance, and I think that's an important part of the work, because in my perception, you have coaches and athletic directors that work within their leagues and their districts, and then they come up to the district director. And so for me as the district director, all those schools kind of communicate with me, and then I become sort of this voice with the WIAA. At the same time, you have the WIA staff, and then you have their board and all of the work they do that should be trickling down to district directors. But the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand, or that might be a misconception, is as a district director, I'm employed by my schools. I am not an employee of the WIAA. So there is this disconnect where if something were to go wrong at a district softball game and somebody wants to be fussy about it, they're going to be mad at the WIAA, where they really should have been mad at District 6, and they don't know what District 6 means. And so, unfortunately, I think there is a little bit of anything that does go sideways. It is all pointed at the WIAA, and it's not always their responsibility. But I do understand, because I hear it a lot of WIA this and WIA that, and so I do believe there is some repair work to be done and some understanding to be done. And I hope through the work of the governance committee and the work through the classification committee that some new things can transpire that's going to allow better communication throughout the organization, that maybe will also create some natural opportunities for good things to come out rather than just kind of the negative.
Right. The challenge posed to the WIAA is making everything equal as possible,
yes,
which is impossible.
Correct.
You've got the population base of Western Washington. We see the political divide between East and West, and now you being from Eastern Washington, really literally from Eastern Washington, I imagine that you're probably getting a lot of phone calls. Thank God we got an Eastern Washington person in there.
Yeah, surprising to say that I would say 3/4 of the reach out has been people from Eastern Washington saying, "Yay, go Eastern Washington, this is very exciting." When I kind of pursued this, I didn't think of myself as Eastern Washington going to Western Washington, but now that it's sinking in, the reality is I think I do have a pretty strong connection with a lot of people. Now that I've been a district director, I've worked with 1Bs, and I've been from the 4As, so I kind of have seen all of it. I just spent quite a bit of time trying to help the 1Bs build a football schedule in Eastern Washington, because it's just messy over here, and there's different issues that they have to face based on their rural communities and how spread out we are. And so I've had the opportunity to kind of get to see a lot of those things. And honestly, I think when I go to work every day, I want to dive in and do the work. But we do have those filters that pop up. And I think one of the filters that will pop up for me is going to be an Eastern Washington filter. I'm going to think a little bit about, but how does that impact a rural school? How does that impact a District 6 that runs from Oroville to Yakima? And just some of that understanding. So there's no doubt in my mind that I'm going to wave that flag from time to time. I also don't go there with some sort of axe to grind about Eastern Washington, but I know that the role I'm going to play is important.
At least to have an educated voice to talk.
Absolutely.
And maybe it's not in Eastern Washington. You mentioned a rural. Having a rural perspective that maybe didn't exist necessarily to what you might be able to bring.
Yeah, and that's how I feel about it. I feel like And it's nice. I think the district director job has also been sort of a blessing that I have had the opportunity to dive into some 1B issues and dive into some 2B issues that I really didn't have exposure to before that. So I look forward to carrying some of that with me.
State allocations is, one of the conversations. I know the Columbia Basin Big Nine has lived all season long with just that one state allocation and things like that. From your perspective going in, not that you're going to be able to just, shuffle the deck and be able to make it all fair for everybody. But coming from that perspective and being the District 6 director and going there, is there a better way that we can do this? Is there something else that can be done so that everybody feels like, okay, we got an actual shot to get representation where it needs to be?
One of the things that I think has been fairly new to the conversation has been around choice. My experience 15 years ago, you were classified where you were classified, and that was it. Like, grin and bear it, and you figure out how to be successful given what you got. But now you're starting to see where a 2B school could opt down to play 1B football. You're starting to see where they're putting some language in there where you could choose to opt down rather than just the opportunity to opt up. So I think what you do is you build a structure, and that really has to do with numbers of kids in your school. You build a structure that kind of feels like it makes sense, and then you have to give school districts some choices. I think it's really important, because I do think if you're a school district that chooses or really feels like it's in your best interest to opt up or down for whatever reason, given that choice sometimes is all you need to know that we had a choice. This is the choice we made, and we're going to live with the choice, but we did have some room for choice. And I think that while that can cause some troubles as well, it also gives, I think, giving people choice. So I really like sort of where we're going, that there's some hard numbers that are going to start the conversation. People have a little bit of choice to move if they fit within the confines of where they could make some of those choices. And you just continue to change it as you need to. I think the other thing is you just don't know where the next school is going to pop up. You don't know when some sort of factory is going to close down and a whole city loses population. There's just been a lot of changes to the landscape. Just take B basketball as an example. Wenatchee High School hosted that for 30 some years, and those entire communities would come to these games, and there was a lot of people. But now when the entire community comes, there's just not as many people. So people aren't living in those communities. There's not as much work for them to do and what have you, and so you just have the landscape is constantly changing. So I don't think there's a perfect way to do it, but I think the addition of some choice is going to help.
It's all about the count and when the count happens, and you kind of touched on transient populations.
Yep.
Are we good when we're counting and how we're counting, or do we still need to tweak that as far as, okay, you have this many people in your school district, you have this many people go to the high school, that type of thing?
Yeah. The nice thing is they're working off of OSPI. So you'd like to hope that the system that OSPI has created that creates the P223 number is a fair system. I think it's also up to school districts to be able to identify some of their creative learning environments. There are schools that have these alternative programs, whether it's separate buildings or same buildings and night schools. And I think that's probably the one place, just really making sure that all those kids are accounted for. But obviously districts are motivated to get the FTE and motivated to have that count accurate. So the hope is we're working on some correct numbers.
Let's talk about your alma mater here.
Yeah.
What needs to be done here as you head west and try to help the entire state through your position with the WIAA?
Yeah.
What would you like to see happen here? This is your exit interview, BJ.
Yeah, my exit interview. Thank you. My first thought is we're too big, and we have too many kids. So when you have 2,000 humans plus a couple hundred adults, there are times that I can walk through our building and be like, I have never seen that kid before, and how does that happen? So I think deep down in my heart, I say to myself, we're too big. And I think the other place where that gets us is if you really want to make sure that every kid has a positive human contact, I just feel like we're a little bit too big to manage that. So that would be part one. Part two, I'd love to see our facility get upgraded. I was a little spoiled in athletics, so even when the Apple Bowl was grass, I mean, we were known for being one of the nicest facilities in the state. Our athletic facilities really are, you know, the gym and those kind of things are outstanding. If I put my athletic director hat on, I would say we need a new track, we need tennis courts. Like, we need those things. That's part of showing that we take pride in our community and our facilities. And then I feel like as a dean of students, I would say we're just a little bit too big. So whether or not we come up with a formula to make this school smaller, or whether there's ways for West Side to get bigger, and I don't have a good answer for that. But my parting sense is we're big.
I guess to counter that, by some in the district, taxpayers in the district would say, well, you keep churning out tennis champions, you keep churning out track champions. You're doing well with what you have.
Yeah, I understand. I feel bad for those kids because I would like them to be able to host an event. There's nothing that I think speaks higher for kids is when it's district tournament time and they get to host it. And when I was an AD and our tennis courts were working, we were able to host districts, and we'd have part of it at the RAC and part of it at our school, and the kids can take pride in it, the parents can take pride in it. There's people can get behind it. We have outstanding community supporters in all of our programs, and it's really fun to get to host an event. And so I feel badly for them that they don't get to do that.
In your career at Wenatchee High School, proudest moment?
You know, I could think of a couple things. One of them, a year ago, we have an award called the Heart of the Panther Award, and one of the categories is super staff. And this is an award that the administration team chooses the winners for these. And when we as an admin team sat down a year ago to select the winners in all the categories, somebody around here got a bright idea and made 10 or 15 people nominate me. And so to sit with my admin team and have my name on the list a bunch of times, and the admin team decided, well, we can't not give her a Heart of the Panther Award. And that meant a lot to me because to have the staff recognize me that would be quite the honor to have. So that would be one thing. And I would say the second thing is proudest moments really, sometimes that week of graduation and you have that kiddo that you've been working with for 3 or 4 years and we're not sure they're going to make it, and they make it. So I don't just have one of those, I have 8 to 10 of those over the last few years, of those moments where a kid makes it and they didn't realize they were going to make it, and standing with them on the stage when they get their diploma. It's pretty impressive.
Okay, so biggest goal you'd like to achieve in your new position?
Touching a little bit on kind of your comment of bridging the feeling out there about the WIAA. I would think my number one thing that I would like to have happen is when people think about the WIAA, they don't sigh and go like, oh, the WIA did this, the WIA did that. So I'm hoping that by getting out and talking with people, being at events and getting to know people that I don't know, and developing, I think there's 2 sides of this. One of it's the relationship side, and the second piece of it is really that statewide communication piece of how do we as an association communicate with a coach, and how does a coach get to communicate with us, and how do we communicate with a kid, and how does a kid get to communicate with us? How do we have an ongoing dialogue with the stakeholders so they feel like they are getting to communicate and that they are getting like we're hearing them. So I think that would be a state kind of just a communication structure that I feel like people can feel good about, number one, and then number two, changing that message a little bit.
Who do you think? This is big.
Yeah, it's big.
This is a big deal.
Yeah.
We're proud of you.
Thank you.
Who do you thank?
It's a long list. Obviously, I grew up in a family with 6 older brothers and 2 older sisters, right? So the love language in our house was sports and competition. And I remember a sign on the the boys' bathroom at the house that said no autopsy, no foul. And so I think starting with thanking my family, right, for building an environment where we compete hard, but we respect each other tremendously. I told my brother one time that he could, kiss my butt and he'd shove me in a snowbank. So you learn really quickly the things that you do and you don't do. And that's really about developing that respect. So I have a lot of brothers and sisters that I think have been a part of this journey. A mom and dad who committed to this valley very deeply and thought beyond the valley, honestly. Just parents that really understand the value of commitment and courage and those kind of things. And then kind of diving into it, I would say you got Bruce Campbell, you have Bob Eller, you have Mike Colbreeze, who's currently there. Guys like Milt Bohart, who from the class of 1948 or 9, I keep messing that up, who have taken the time to care about me as a human being. Of course, I have a family who has had to commit to moving with me, and so I'm very, very thankful for having a partner that's willing to do this with me, because this has been a big dream for me to get to do this. So I'm sure I'm missing plenty of people, but I have a fantastic set of brothers and sisters. We had great parents that went before us, and then there's been a lot of people in these halls. I would say that probably the most important people in this entire set of halls for me has been Scott Benner. You probably know Scott Benner. He was one of my teachers. When I became an AD, he was the very first guy I grabbed to get on board with me and to work athletic events with me. So there's those kind of people that have just kind of stood around me and been this support crew and kind of poking me and moving me forward. And more recently, even though relationships are not maybe as deep and long as they have been, the people that I've worked really closely with that have continued to support me. I think you'll get a kick out of, while we've done this interview, my secretary hung a sign on the window back here saying, BJ, please don't leave us, we love you. So there's just a lot of people, some that have gone way back and some that have been more recent. But there's a lot of people to thank, but that's just at least a short laundry list.
Excitement and emotional at the same time.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Yet to dream come true.
Thank you.
You're welcome.